extend a very warm welcome to all of you to join this IBC session. This session is basically to update you on the latest decisions which have been made by regulators, Supreme Court, the Honorable High Court, NCLT, and we are sure and confident that post this session, you will have a much better understanding of the regulatory updates, which will help us in our day-to-day business activity, and particularly as bankers, we will try to share with you what is the implication of those decisions. So we have Mr. Sudarshan Kedia as the speaker, whom all of you know. He's a very prolific writer and speaker. He will brief you on this today. So kindly, Mr. Kedia, a warm welcome, and kindly take over the stage and share with us your immense learning on the subject. Sudarshan ji?
Yes, thank you Sanjay ji for a brief introduction. So I welcome all my participants, and as you are aware of, myself Sudarshan Kedia from Research and Resolution Professionals LLP, which is an IP. So today my effort will be to discuss some of the case laws which has been accordingly pronounced by Supreme Court, NCLAT and NCLT. So to start with, the first, I've shared the screen whether that is being accessible by all the participants. Sanjay ji, whether you can access the shared screen?
I can. The screen is visible and the font is quite clear.
Okay, great. So the first case which I would like to discuss is between Dr. Vishnu Kumar Agarwal versus Piramal Enterprises Limited. It has been pronounced by NCLAT. Here in this case, the issue was whether an applicant, which is a financial institution, can file petition against the borrower as well as the corporate guarantor parallelly or not. So herein the related issue is whether once an application filed by a lender for initiating CIP against either the principal borrower or the corporate guarantor or one of the corporate guarantors has been admitted, whether such lender can file an application for initiating CIP in respect of the other entities based on the same debt or not. So this is one of the issue which has been adequately addressed under this case law. The Company Law Appellate Tribunal held that if for the same set of claim, application has been admitted against one of the corporate debtor, that may be either a principal borrower or a corporate guarantor, then second application by the same financial creditor for the same set of claim and default cannot be admitted against the other corporate debtor. Further, it was held that for the same set of debt, a claim cannot be filed by a financial creditor in two separate CIP of the principal borrower and the corporate guarantor, which is essentially a double dip and is not permissible under insolvency law as discussed above. However, an appeal can be filed, has been filed against the Piramal judgment before the Supreme Court of India, which is currently pending. So under this case law, if in the normal parlance, whenever any loan has been sanctioned, basically what we do that we take the corporate guarantee also. In some of the cases, we take the corporate guarantee of the holding company or the flagship company of the group, and based upon that comfort only, we lend money to one of the SPV or the subsidiary company of that group accordingly. So as in that case, we do have a principal borrower and a corporate guarantor having two different entity. So now in case in case of IBC, whenever any default arises, in case of principal borrower, the question is whether we can whether we can drag the company, principal borrower as well as a corporate guarantor simultaneously to the IBC or not. The answer is yes, we can drag both the entities into the NCLT on a simultaneous basis. But once either the corporate debtor, corporate guarantor, or the principal borrower, either of it, if the case gets admitted, then we loses an opportunity to for the another another case. Suppose if the case has been admitted for the principal borrower, then we vote, then our case for the against the corporate guarantor will not get admitted by the NCLT. But that corporate guarantor, that entity can be dragged by any other creditor apart from us. And if suppose if in that case, if that company is being dragged by any other creditor, then in that case we can file a claim stating out with a proper disclaimer that we have already filed a claim in one of the entity, that may be a principal borrower or a corporate guarantor. So that disclosures need to be given so that whenever any distribution is being made, then accordingly IRP or RP can take due care and be double sure about the double payment of the claim. So this is one of the case which is worth mentioning over here. Now the second case is between Rajendra K. Bhutta versus Maharashtra Housing and Area Development Authority and others. This is one of the case which has been pronounced by the Supreme Court. Herein the corporate debtor entered into a tri-party agreement, that is a tri-party joint development agreement with the development of the land. So here are two parties are there. One is the developer, other is the landowner. So here in the landowner is Maharashtra Housing and Area Development Authority, who has entered into a joint development agreement with a developer. As a result of corporate debtor defaulting in repayment of loan taken for the development of the land, the bank initiated CIP against the corporate debtor. So herein the case is one corporate debtor is there who being acting as a developer. He has taken the land from Maharashtra Housing and Area Development Authority on joint development agreement, on the basis of joint development agreement. And after entering into a joint development agreement, the developer approached the financial institution for the construction finance. Now after availing out the construction finance, the developer defaults the loan. Now the question arises, during moratorium, the party to whom the land belongs, that is Maharashtra Housing and Area Development Authority, served a termination notice upon the corporate debtor, stating that within 30 days of receipt of the notice, the contract would be deemed to be terminated and the land with all the structures will be repossessed by it. So herein the landowner who entered into a joint development agreement with the developer issue a so-cause notice to the developer that within 30 days the lease will be this joint development agreement will be terminated, and that he issued the so-cause notice after the initiation of the CIP. So the question here is that during the period of the CIP, whether the landowner who has entered into a joint development agreement with the developer can terminate the lease agreement or not. The Honorable Supreme Court analyzed Section 14D, subsection D of the Code, which deals with moratorium. The Supreme Court observed that the section does not deal with any beneficial interest or legal right of the corporate debtor in any property. Further, it's clarified that the word on owner, leaser, and recovery of property will have to be addressed separately. That is, the recovery of a property occupied by a corporate debtor shall be made by a owner and a property in possession, which means either constructive or actual possession or includes legal possession of the property of the corporate debtor can be recovered by the lessor. In the given situation, the corporate debtor only has a license to make development on the land of the party to the contract, which creates a beneficial interest in favor of the corporate debtor, does not amount to occupancy or possession. Therefore, the termination notice would not fall under the ambit of moratorium, and the land will not be property, will not be the property of the corporate debtor. So under this case law, it has been ascertained that if any joint development agreement is being entered between the landowner and the developer, then in that case, the landowner creates a beneficial interest upon the corporate debtor only, and accordingly moratorium doesn't apply to that case, and a lease can be terminated even after the initiation of the CIP process also. Case which I would like to discuss is Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai and Abhilash Lal Supreme Court. It's a verdict being given by the Supreme Court. The applicant and the respondent had entered into a lease agreement whereby the applicant leased his land for 30 years to the respondent. The respondent availed loan against the said land, on default of which CIP was initiated against the respondent. NCLT approved the resolution plan, creating fresh interest in the land. Appeal when dismissed by the INCLAT, the present appeal is referred before. So herein also a lease agreement has been entered between the landowner and the developer, wherein the lease has been given for 30 years, and based upon that lease agreement, construction need to be done upon the land. And the developer has availed some loan from the banking institution, and after availment of the loan gets default. So, and a CIP process has been initiated. So, herein the question is, would the provision of the code override the provision of the Mumbai Municipal Corporation Act 1888, and hence the resolution plan approved by the NCLT acquires primacy over all other legal provisions. So herein, Supreme Court held that overriding provisions pursuant to section 238 of the code shall only be applicable in case where the asset of the corporate debtor are in question. This is very important. Section 238 of the code shall only be applicable in case where the asset of the corporate debtor are in question and not that of the third party. So in the absence of approval in terms of section 92 and 92A of the NMC Act, the adjudicating authority could not have overridden MCGM objection and enable the creation of a fresh interest in respect of its properties in land. A fresh interest in the property of MCGM could not be created without the consent of the municipal corporation. This is Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai. So if any fresh interest need to be created as per the resolution plan, then that ought to be with the consent of the Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai only. So a fresh interest in the property of MCGM could only be created could not be created without its consent, as there can be no estoppel against the expression provision of law. Hence, on such grounds, upheld MCGM right to control and regulate how its properties are dealt with. So MCGM right to regulate its own land is only with with consent only. So any resolution which need to be passed on by the AA, that need to have a consent of MCGM, that is a municipal corporation of Greater Mumbai. Now I'm moving out to next case study. This case study is all about, it's between Anuj Jain, interim resolution professional for JP Infratech Limited versus Axis Bank Limited. And this case study has been pronounced by Supreme Court. In this matter, the CD JP Infratech Limited, which is a subsidiary of JAL, had mortgaged its property as collateral security for the loans and advances made by the banks and financial institutions to its holding company, that is JAL. So herein JIL is a subsidiary of JAL, and the corporate debtor over here is JIL, which is a subsidiary company, and JL is a holding company. And JL has taken some loan. JL has taken some loan from its from banks, wherein as a security, the properties of his subsidies, that is JIL, has been offered to the lenders. The AA held this as avoidance agreement, preferential, undervalued, and fraudulent, which was set aside by the INCLAT. In appeal, the Supreme Court held as under. So, in the previous occasions, NCLT and INCLAT do have different views, and wherein the Supreme Court is held as under to be termed as financial debt. Now, the lenders of the holding company who has taken the securities, who has taken the securities of its subsidiary companies as a collateral security, they want to be treated as financial creditors in the COC of the subsidiary company. So now the question arises whether the lenders of the holding company who has been offered the securities of the subsidiary company can be treated as a financial creditor in the subsidiary company or not, in the COC of the subsidiary company or not. Now, to be termed financial debt, consideration for time value of money is essential. Mortgages being neither towards any loan, facility, or advance to the CD, not towards protecting any facility or securities of the CD. So it does not constitute financial debt within the meaning of Section 5 under Section 8, though they could be on the strength of the mortgage, could be a secured creditors. So herein the Supreme Court held that if any subsidiary company do provide security to its holding company, do provide security to the lenders of the holding company against any loan which has been offered to the holding company, then in that case the lenders of the holding company cannot be treated as a financial creditor, for the COC of the subsidiary company. But they are but Supreme Court has not denied that they cannot be treated as a creditor. They can be treated as a creditor, but they cannot be treated as a financial creditor. Now next case, it's Seamless Limited versus Padmanabhan Venkatesh and others. Resolution plan be lower than the liquidation value or not? So this is one of the verdict which has been pronounced by Supreme Court only, wherein uh, wherein Supreme Court is very much clear in its thought process that any resolution plan which has been submitted by the resolution applicant uh, can be of any value, irrespective of the liquidation value as per the valuation report. Now, on appeal, the Supreme Court decided there is no provision in the code or regulation which prescribe that the bid of any resolution applicant has to match the liquidation value. The object behind prescribing the valuation process is to assist the COC to take a decision on the resolution plan properly. Once the resolution plan has been approved by the COC, the AA ought to cede ground to the commercial wisdom of the creditors rather than assess the resolution plan itself. The exit route prescribed in Section 12A is not applicable to a successful resolution applicant and is available only to the applicant initiating CIP. So, a resolution plan, a resolution applicant can bid for any value which may or may not be lower than liquidation value. So any bid value which is lower than the liquidation value can even be approved by the COC on the merit of the case accordingly. My next case is Bank of Baroda on behalf of COC of creditors of Veda Biofuel Limited versus Mr. Sisir Kumar Apikat RP. Whether restructuring plan can be termed as a resolution plan under IBC. So this is one of the most interesting case wherein company has been dragged into NCLT, and after dragging into an NCLT, the company has been and a CIP has been initiated. Post initiation of the CIP, uh, one of the close associate of the places before the COC a restructuring plan, wherein the shareholding percentage of the promoter in the earlier occasion has been reduced to less than 50%, wherein in the earlier case they were holding 100%. Now, on the basis of the restructuring plan, they sought some deferment of their existing obligation and liability towards the bank only. Now, whatever restructuring plan they have submitted, COC has approved that restructuring plan, and on the basis of that approval, they have referred the case to AA for the final approval. Now, AA after going through the resolution plan has some apprehension, as that resolution plan, which is originally a restructuring plan, has taken into consideration the well-being of the financial creditors only, that is bank. So that resolution plan was failed to address the well-being of all the stakeholders of the company, as well as it failed to prove that how the value of CD is going to be maximized. So as it goes right now over here, creditors for consideration along with the creditors for consideration along with the restructuring plan. The committee of creditors did not consider the withdrawal of the company petition in view of the provision of Section 12A of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, and instead approved the restructuring plan, treating it as resolution plan, which undoubtedly was based on an agreement between the resolution applicant and erstwhile promoter and managing director of the corporate debtor. The adjudicating authority has rightly declined to approve the resolution plan of resolution applicant, which was only used as a ploy to gain control of the corporate debtor by the very person who has pushed the corporate debtor into insolvency. So herein the applicant who dragged the company into insolvency, uh, that that applicant himself had put across the resolution plan, that is a restructuring plan, in front of the COC. The committee of creditors has overlooked the settlement offer and ignored the withdrawal fee without assigning any reason. This is itself raises eyebrows. This is further compounded by approval of the restructuring plan camouflaged as resolution plan. So in the given situation, if any restructuring plan, if the promoter wants to come up with any restructuring plan after the initiation of the CIP, then that in that case, the COC has to withdraw the case by somewhere around 90% voting share, and with that 90% voting share, the company has to come out of the IBC, and after that, the promoter can place the restructuring package before the uh, financial institution and get it approved accordingly. Next case is State of Haryana to Excise and Taxation Officer cum Assessing Authority versus Uttam Strip Limited. This is one of the case wherein it has been pronounced by Inclat only. So herein, in the major question which has arisen under this law, whether all past liabilities which are being there, past and unclaimed liabilities are there. So how a resolution applicant can safeguard, so that he can crystallize the past liabilities and take an informed decision to revive and turn around the corporate debtor accordingly. So herein in this case, it has been categorically stated out that no past and unclaimed liabilities shall lie on successful resolution applicant after approval of resolution plan. If the OC or any creditor has not submitted the claim, he is not entitled to raise it once resolution plan is approved by AA. So until and unless the plan is being approved by the AA, till that point of time, any creditor with due permission and by stating out sufficient ground for delay can put in and file the claim before the RP. But once the resolution plan is being approved, then there is no scope of filing out of any claim before the RP accordingly. So once RP is submitted, a resolution plan is submitted and approved, old claims can't be submitted. So in this case law, Inclat has stated out one point beyond which no past liability, no past and unclaimed liability can be entertained by the resolution applicant accordingly. In the next case, that is between Mr. Ram Ravindranath Reddy versus Mr. G. Krishnan and others, it helps us to ascertain whether lease of immovable property is financial or operational debt. Lease of immovable property is financial or operational debt. So this, in this appeal, the INCLAT considered whether a landlord who has granted lease is an OC. It is observed that the code recognizes two types of debt. One is financial debt, another is operational debt. Accordingly, financial creditors and operational creditors may make an application for initiating CIP, and no other creditors qualify to make an application. It stated that for, for a debt to be classified as operational debt, it must fall into one of the three following categories. So what are they? The debt amount should fall within the definition of claim under section 3 subsection 6. Another is such a claim should fall within the confines of the definition of a debt under section 3 subsection 11, and such a debt should fall strictly within the scope of operational debt. So when we talk about operational debt, it means that it should be pertaining to rendering of services or availment of purchase or sale of goods. So if if the transaction involves goods and services, then accordingly that can be termed as operational debt. It concluded that lease of immovable property cannot be considered as a supply of goods or rendering of any services, and thus cannot be considered as operational debt. So under this case law, it is being very specifically mentioned that lease of immovable property cannot be termed as operational. And when there are two types of debt only, that is financial and operational debt. So if it is being cleared out that it cannot be termed as operational debt, so it can be termed as financial debt as a residual measure. The next case, that is between Punjab National Bank versus Mr. Kiran Shah, liquidator of ORG Infotech Limited. It says that this case law states out that whether once the liquidator is being appointed after passing out the liquidation order, whether the COC has the power to invoke that appointment or not. So herein, the lead bank in the COC challenged the appointment of the liquidator after the AA passed the liquidation order. So whether that is tenderable or not, that need to be looked into. The INCLAT held that after the liquidation order, the COC has no role to play. The INCLAT held that after the liquidation order, the COC has no role to play, and that they are simply claimant whose matters are to be determined by the liquidator, and hence cannot move an application for his removal. So this is one of the point which is being very much clarified, that once a liquidator has been appointed under the after with an order of the liquidation, then COC has no power to get it removed in ordinary course, they cannot get it removed. But in exceptional cases, there are some exceptions wherein they can get it removed, wherein they find it's a matter of integrity of the liquidator. Next case which I am going to discuss is Savan Godiwala versus Mr. Apala Sivakumar. This, this case is also being pronounced by INCLAT only. Herein, the issue that arose before the INCLAT was that whether a liquidator can be directed to make payment of gratuity to the employees of the company in case no fund is created by the company in violation of the statutory provision of the Payment of Gratuity Act 1972. So herein, whether the liquidator can be directed to make the payment of gratuity to the employees of the company in case no fund is created, no separate fund has been created for that. So herein the INCLAT held that it is a settled position of law that Provident Fund, Pension Fund and Gratuity Fund do not come within the purview of liquidation state. I repeat, the INCLAT held that it is a settled position of law that the Provident Fund, Pension Fund and Gratuity Fund do not come within the purview of liquidation state for the purpose of distribution of assets under section 53 of the code. The INCLAT stated that the only inference which can be drawn is that pension fund, gratuity fund and provident fund cannot be used, attached or distributed by the liquidator to satisfy the claim of other creditors. So what we have understood that this pension fund, gratuity fund and provident fund, these funds cannot be utilized to settle the claim of any other creditors. The INCLAT further stated that section 36 subsection 2 of the code provides that the liquidator shall hold the liquidation state in fiduciary capacity for the benefit of all the creditors. It has also held that the liquidator has no domain to deal with any other property of the corporate debtor which does not form part of the liquidation state. The INCLAT opinion that even in a case where no fund is created by the company in violation of the statutory provision of section 4 of the liquidator cannot be directed to ensure payment of gratuity to the employees since the liquidator does not have the power to deal with the properties of the corporate debtor which do not form part of the liquidation state. So herein, under this case law, this is being very much clear that gratuity fund, pension fund and provident fund cannot be the part of the liquidation state. And moreover, the liquidator cannot be directed to ensure payment of gratuity to the employees from the liquidation state, whatever he has, because these funds, whatever be, if the fund, provident fund, gratuity fund or pension fund, if that funds are being created as per the law, then from that fund also you cannot pay other creditors' claim also. So if the fund is being created, then a liquidator can make a payment. If the fund is not created, then he cannot make a payment to employees accordingly. Next case law which I'm going to discuss is Amount Power Solution Private Limited versus Sanjeev Kumar Nayak and others. This is one of the case law which has been pronounced by INCLAT only. The issue that arose for consideration of the NCLAT was whether a resolution plan providing nil amount to the operational creditors could have been approved by the executing authority. So this is a case wherein we need to discuss that whether a payment to the operational creditor in the resolution plan is necessary, is mandatory or not. So herein in one of the resolution plan, there was no payment to operational creditors, and whether if there is no payment to operational creditors, then whether that type of resolution plan can be approved by the AA or not. The NCLAT held that providing nil amount of operational creditors in a resolution plan would certainly not balance the interest of all stakeholders. So we need to understand that while approving any resolution plan, COC has to consider the interest of all the stakeholders and maximize the value of asset of the corporate debtor. The NCLAT further opinion that a resolution plan need to reflect that the interest of all stakeholders, including operational creditors, has to be taken care of, and that it has taken into account the fact that the corporate debtor need to be kept as a going concern. The order of the executing authority where it approved a resolution plan which did not locate any amount to operational creditors was therefore set aside by the NCLAT. So any resolution plan which does not take into account the interest of all the stakeholders, as well as does not lay emphasis upon the maximization of the value of the assets of the corporate debtor, cannot be approved by the AA. So now the question arises, what would be the amount which need to be payable to the operational creditors at the time of preparation of the resolution plan? So to be very precise, and as per the trends in the earlier occasions, whatever amount which need to be captured as a repayment to the as a payment to the operational creditor should be equivalent to liquidation value, of the corporate debtor, so that it can be addressed accordingly, and a due care in terms of interest can be considered by the COC. So liquidation value to the operational creditors or any other value which may be deemed fit by the COC can be paid to the operational creditors accordingly. In the next case, it's about Varshana Employee Welfare Association versus Honorable Liquidator and Consortium of Banks. It is one of the case which has been passed by NCLT Kolkata bench, wherein the company is into liquidation. And after passing out the liquidation order, the liquidator distributed a sum of money to the COC, which is acting as an interim payment, to the COC from the working capital of the company only, that is not out of the realization of the assets. So now the question arises whether the action which has been taken by the liquidator is in line with the rules and regulations of the liquidation process or not, or whether a liquidator can distribute interim, whether the can release interim payment to the COC when the company is under liquidation process. The applicant contended that liquidator in violation of the regulation and provision of the code and in disobedience of the order of the AA dated this, disbursed an amount. He has disbursed an amount to the financial creditors of the corporate debtor and also arbitrarily reduced the salary of the employees. This is pre-COVID only, because during COVID, if he would have done, then that may justify his action. But this is something which the liquidator has done pre-COVID only. The employee association prayed for reversal of disbursement of funds of the corporate debtor distributed to the creditors and for an interim order restraining the liquidator from deduction of salary payable to the employees. So herein, there are two prayers which has been done by employee association, that whatever payment has been done, interim payment has been done by the liquidator to the to the banks, to the lenders, that need to be get reversed, and moreover whatever salary has been deducted, that needs to be restored accordingly. The Council of Employee submitted that the corporate debtor is under liquidation and the liquidator has no power to distribute the fund to stakeholders, and distribution amount to violation of regulation 42. He would submit that section 53 did not permit the liquidator to distribute fund of the CD prior to realization of sale, prior to realization of proceeds from the sale of the liquidation state. According to him, as per section 42 subsection 2, the IBBI liquidation process, regulation 2016, the liquidator shall distribute the proceed from realization and not from the working capital fund or from the profit. So under this case law, it has been precisely very much, they have made it very clear that during the liquidation process, whatever distribution need to happen, that distribution should be from the realization of sale proceeds only and not from the working capital fund or from the profit. The distribution of fund from working capital and profit to the stakeholders till assets have been liquidated, until the liquidator realizes the complete liquidation value is not in conformity with the provision of the code and regulations. So if any interim distribution happens, which is not as a result of the distribution, which is not as a result of the realization of the sale proceeds, but as a result of the working capital fund or profit, then that is not in conformity with the provision of the code and regulations. The stakeholders, financial creditors who are in receipt of the funds shall keep the amount received by them in an interest-bearing account, a CD, and returnable as per regulation 43 if need arises for operating the CD. So whatever payment has been done, and payment has been made to the lenders, then they have to get it returned to the liquidator, and according to the liquidator will deposit that money, that amount in an interest-bearing account, and accordingly can utilize that amount as and when need arises. The liquidator is directed to pay the portion of salary deducted from the salary of the employee with the applicable bank interest in the date of the payment. So whatever reduction in salary has been made by the liquidator, that need to be restored immediately and accordingly to be paid to the employees. So herein, once the company goes into a liquidation, then as per the liquidation process, all the employees all the employees are being terminated or deemed to serve notice of their termination. But there is a provision that a liquidator can run the company as a going concern and can sell off as a going concern also, as if the IP who is acting as an RP during the CIP process. So he can take special permission from NCLT on case to case basis, and can seek time from NCLT to sell off the company as a going concern, so that there's a probability of greater value proposition also. So till the time till the time he gets he's being approved to sell off the company as a going concern, in that case he can restore and make available all the employees to work in the company accordingly as a going concern, and wherein he has the power to reduce the number of employees as per the requirement, and even can renegotiate also, but arbitrarily he cannot reduce the wages or salaries of any employees without their consent, if any. The next case which I'm going to discuss is Liquidator Varsana Ispat Limited versus Deputy Director, Enforcement Directorate, Honorable NCLT, Kolkata. So in this case also, uh, the main issue which has arisen is the properties or the asset of the corporate debtor is being attached by the Enforcement Directorate, and the company is into liquidation. Now the question arises, when the assets of the corporate debtor which is into liquidation is being attached by the Enforcement Directorate, whether uh, whether the liquidator can sell off the assets of the company under the liquidation, because it somehow or other Enforcement Directorate do have an interference, because they do have an attachment over the asset of the company. So this case law help us to ascertain what would be the solution out of it. So the NCLT has allowed the liquidator to sell the assets of the company that was attached by investigative agencies. The liquidator is permitted to sell the assets of the corporate debtor which was attached by the Enforcement Directorate, subject to the right of the buyer to apply for deattachment. So here the NCLT provides the right to the buyer that he can deattach the property accordingly. The liquidator is permitted to sell the assets of the corporate debtor which was attached by the Enforcement Directorate, subject to the right of the buyer to apply for deattachment. So herein, whosoever may be the buyer can take an informed decision to buy the property which is already being attached with one of the investigative agency. Herein, his prima condition wherein he can enter into a buyer and seller agreement, that did need to be detached by the investigative agency. So herein the liquidator will be given an opportunity to sell off the asset of the corporate debtor with the condition that it can be detached with an application, it can be detached with an application of the buyer accordingly. Liquidator did not press for passing an order for detachment here. What he pressed for is to relieve to proceed with the sale of the asset which were under attachment in view of the non-obstance clause as provided under section 32A. So herein the liquidator was trying to detach the property and got and herein the liquidator tried to detach the property in the first instance. The liquidator tried to detach the property and then sell off accordingly. But after due effort, it has been ascertained that uh, and an appropriate order was there from NCLT that sale of property can happen of sale of property can happen even without detachment, but with the with with subject to a clause that whosoever is going to buy that property can apply for detachment, and accordingly it can be heard and can be detached according on the merit of the case. So another one case I would like to discuss is of ISAR only. So let me share that. So one of the compilation of ISAR, wherein I would like to touch base some of the important findings of the Supreme Court. No, hearing wherein one of the finding which is noteworthy over here is uh, whenever any company goes into a CIP or a CIP initiation has been done. So there's a common logical question that during the CIP process, if the company is into going concern, then if it is in going concern, then there's a probability that the company may earn some profit also during that period. That is 180 days or 270 days or 330, whatever may be the case. And whatever profit which is being earned during that CIP period, then who is eligible to take benefit of that profit? whether it's a COC who has to take the benefit of that profit, or it's a resolution applicant who will take the benefit of that CIP profit. Because so that is one of the important questions which has been adequately addressed, or which has been adequately addressed under this order only. So if you can see this serial number 9, that is utilization of profit of the CD under CIP. So distribution of profit made during the CIP will not go towards payment of debt of any creditor. So this is one of the direction of the Supreme Court, that whatever profit will be earned during the CIP period, that will be the part of the resolution applicant only. So that resolution applicant need to, because as he's been taking over the company, so all the assets which are there in the company, irrespective it's a tangible or intangible assets. So he's one of the person who do have a right over that, and accordingly, whatever unearned profit is there, unearned or earned profit, whatever may be the case, his profit is there. That is being the that is resolution applicant is a part of that, is the owner of that profit only. Uh, and the same logic goes with cash and bank balance also, because whatever cash and bank balance is there, so at the time of takeover of any resolution applicant, so that whatever cash and bank balance is there, that is also being the part of resolution applicant only. Yeah, so based upon this, I would like to invite any queries which if there is any from the respected members, so that we can discuss and interact. And if it is being unresolved in any way, then we members can mail across to us the queries, and we can try our level best to get it addressed as early as possible. So I invite queries if there is any from the respected members, and 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 would like to take it forward accordingly. So members can unmute their audio, and one by one they can raise queries if there is any. Yes, Rujula ji, please, you have raised hand. You can let us understand your query, and let's see how we can address it out. I do request members who want to share any queries, do unmute them out, and please raise any query if they do have.
Rujula ji, your voice is not clear. Can you once again raise your query? We've already unmuted you. So I think we are missing Rujula ji's voice. Is there any other query?
Hello.
Yeah, please.
Sir, this is Rajeshwari, advocate from Chennai.
Yes, please.
Yes, ma'am.
Sir, can I raise my doubt regarding the action against the personal guarantors to corporate debtors, or I should raise my queries only regarding the judgments now discussed?
No, you can, so ma'am, you can raise any
Regarding
query.
IBC, na?
Yeah, IBC,
Yeah.
you can raise any query. We will try to get it addressed. If we are unable to do so, we will surely get back to you accordingly.
Yes, sir. Sir, I'll just list out my doubts.
Yes.
This is regarding, see, under the provisions notified for personal guarantors,
Hmm.
they are telling creditors meeting, means it is not like financial creditors. Here it is creditors, because it is not a resolution plan, it is a repayment plan. And it has to be either the RP can hold a COC, or if he feels that it need not be done, he need not hold a COC also. But
Very
if
true.
he holds a COC, then the participation, the secured creditors have got the right to vote. Here is a question where generally in the CD case, no, only the financial creditors will vote. Whereas in this type of cases, it is only tell the section and the regulations, rules, everything says it is the creditors, and secured creditor can vote. Is it not? So my query is whether all creditors, operational, financial, all creditors can vote.
Yeah, all creditors
And
can vote.
moreover, one more provision is there for secured creditors can, during the moratorium also, they can stand outside, they can enforce the security, and they can participate only regarding the unsecured portion, and they can vote regarding the unsecured portion. So it means that secured, unsecured, financial, operation, all of them have got the right to vote. Is it, sir?
Yes, all the creditors has the right to vote.
Correct? The
Yeah.
understanding is correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, then the next question is, one second, sir. The limitation aspect is there, no? Here also for enforcing against the personal guarantors. But most of the cases where the banks have already invoked the provisions under SARFAESI and DRT, this notification having come only now, would not have taken action under IBC, or would not have taken under the earlier statutes of provincial and presidential insolvency acts. So now if they go under these rules and regulations and the sections now notified, it would have been time barred already. 3 years time would have been already barred, because from the date of the cause of action, 3 years would have been barred. Is it not, sir? In many cases. Hello?
Yes.
What is the remedy in such matters? See, in CD matter, in the corporate debtors matters, it is understood that earlier there was a provision under the Companies Act and SICA, and they should have gone by that. And after that, if they have not done, then it is time bar and all, it is all understood. Whereas similar such provision under provincial and presidential insolvency acts and all not used, and it is not there like what is now available. In such circumstances, whether limitation can be taken from the date the act is notified, from the date the provisions are notified.
Ma'am,
The
I would like
question
to I would like to park this question. You can send across over the mail, so we can definitely revert you accordingly, because this I need to get updated about it, and accordingly we'll definitely get it addressed accordingly over the mail.
Okay, sir. So this is a concern actually.
Yeah,
After
definitely, ma'am. We'll address your concern accordingly.
Yes, sir. And 1 second, sir. Let me see what more. Sir, this there is a format for filing case against these personal guarantors. And if you see though, that format, it contains a lot of clauses which cannot be replied at all, which cannot be filled up at all. For example, excluded assets means, for example, excluded asset include one residential house worth 20 lakhs. Any person will be having a house at least worth 40 lakhs or 45 lakhs. How we will take part it as 20 and above and all. It is
Ma'am, I
difficult.
suppose in that case, you need to rely upon the net worth statements duly certified by the chartered accountant.
Fine, sir. What I'm telling, the chartered accountant certifies that the only residential house this man resides is worth 40 lakhs. It is, if it is so, see, 20 lakhs worth the house only is excluded. What about the remaining 20 lakhs? There is some ambiguity. It is difficult the excluded to identify the excluded assets and put it in the format. And one more says that 1 lakh worth Mangal Sutra excluded, like that they are telling. See, we do not know, na Mangal Sutra value, it may go up also.
Ma'am, if it's all depend upon, it's a subjective matter, wherein you need to take a call and you need to substantiate your opinion accordingly. So it's an opinion based, it's a judgmental opinion which you need to have it, you need to have to take care
It has
of.
to be tested.
Yeah. So,
but sir, it is actually vague, na, ambiguous. We do not know this. Filling up is becoming difficult, na, the format.
Yeah,
that is what
yeah. So there is hardship.
This kind of practical difficulties can be taken up, no, sir, for clarity and all. That is why I am suggesting.
Yeah, that can be taken up with due IBBI. We in different forums we
because
can.
You are you are an institution.
Yeah, definitely, ma'am.
That is why I just want you to know.
We'll try to address your issue and we'll take up the matter accordingly. That whatever procedural hardship is there, that can be, if that can be eased out in any way or not.
Sir, then this RP who is appointed for the CIRP purpose cannot be an RP for this guarantor, personal guarantor also. There is a disqualification under the regulations. Na?
Yes.
So then if one RP for CIRP of the CD and another RP for this guarantor, will it not both of them will be having...
They have to work as a team.
Two, three people for one case.
Because this regulation has been imposed in order to ensure much more transparency, and so that both the process can be run independently of each other.
Idea is that only, but multiple persons will handle single account. And sir, there is no clarity. Suppose, see, one person is a guarantor for 2-3 accounts, different banks. How this? If you are initiating action against that personal guarantor for one person, how the other accounts will be addressed? We will have to file separate, independent against the same guarantor.
No, in that case, all once the process has been initiated, then accordingly claims need to be filed, and as per the filed claims, only the resolution plan will be drafted by the.
No, I am asking, sir. This one single person A is a guarantor for B, C, D, E 3 companies.
Yes.
Then when we file a reference, B, C only defaulters. Like that, then D, E are not defaulters.
So you mean to say A is one of the company who has given guarantee to several other companies, isn't it? And where
A is one personal individual guarantor. He has given guarantee for 2-3 companies.
Okay.
And we want to file reference for only one company.
You have to file reference to against one company only, because if suppose if a person is there who has given guarantee to B, C, D, and E, and out of B, C, D, and E, only out of that 4 company, only one company has defaulted. Is it the case?
And what will happen now, sir? One out of the 4 companies for which he has given guarantee, 2 are already under CIRP, 2 are not under CIRP.
Only for the one under CIRP.
So this we have to file under section 60 only in the NCLT where the CIRP is pending against this personal guarantor also.
In that case, you can invoke the guarantee only, na? So until unless you invoke the guarantee, you cannot file the claim.
But without default.
No, without default. Suppose if in that case, because if you want to keep yourself safeguarded, then irrespective, because now the question arises that whether if the corporate debtor is not defaulted, corporate debtor has not, the principal borrower has not defaulted, but the corporate guarantor or the personal guarantor has defaulted in any way or though, in any way or though. So in that case, you cannot file the claim until unless you invoke your guarantee. So in order to safeguard yourself out, whether and you want to file a claim, then in that case you have to first invoke the guarantee and then only you can file the claim. Or it is your choice. You cannot invoke the guarantee and don't file the claim. Sit idle and wait and watch. It's a wait and watch situation accordingly.
No, sir. The question is when one corporate debtor alone, that is, this guarantor has given guarantee for 2-3 companies. One company alone is already under CARP. Others are all not under CARP, though they are defaulters.
Okay.
So if I want to invoke my guarantee for all the 3 companies, whether I can file reference in a single petition to the same NCLT where CARP is pending for one company.
But whatever application you are going to file, that is against the personal guarantor only, I suppose. So in case of personal guarantee, you can give references of different companies. You can give reference because you are filing a case against a personal guarantor against several companies.
Yes.
So in that
so
case,
single reference is sufficient.
You can consolidate your application accordingly.
So only one.
Only one application towards a personal guarantor, wherein you can say that towards this company your amount is this much due, towards this company this much due. So like this you can consolidate and you can file a petition.
Okay, here there is one more provision under the regulations. The creditor is not eligible to purchase the asset of the guarantor. See, if the guarantor is under the repayment plan, if the guarantor's property is brought for sale, there is a stipulation that the creditor, the banker, financial creditor, or any other creditor cannot participate in the process to purchase the property. Actually, under the SARFAESI, if you see, no sir, banker themselves can purchase if there is no buyer. You know the provision, no?
Yes.
There is a provision under the SARFAESI Act to say that if there is no buyer for the first time, the banker can himself participate and buy the property. When there is such a provision, why such a contradictory provision for under this IBC disqualifying a creditor from participating in purchasing the property? Sir?
Because IBC, it's my personal opinion that IBC, whatever rules and regulations are being formulated under IBC, that has been taken into account that creditors, when you're talking about creditors, I suppose you've been talking about financial creditors only. It's not
all creditors you can, sir, because under this personal guarantor, there is no difference between financial creditor and other creditors.
No, when you're talking about, so you are saying that creditors cannot purchase the property. You cannot. They cannot.
Under the regulation, there is a stipulation that the creditor cannot purchase the property. I am asking why there is a contradiction between this provision and this SARFAESI Act. Why can't a creditor purchase this property? What is the problem? See, purchasing is different and submitting a resolution plan is different. Under 29A, there is a provision that a resolution applicant cannot be so and so related party and all. That is fine. When a property is being sold, why a creditor is stopped from bidding it? See, there may be several reasons. The borrower himself will put spokes on this process. Many buyers will not come forward. In such a situation, why the creditor cannot purchase it? This also kindly take up.
Yeah, definitely, ma'am. I don't have an immediate reply to this query.
Okay, sir. So this is a sum up. One is limitation aspect. I'm just summing up what I have been asking. So one is limitation aspect. Next one is excluded assets definition. Unencumbered tools, books and all, which is difficult for us to identify. There should be some kind of some definite like rules to value these things. how to value these things and all, we will never know. It is difficult to fill up the format. So number 2. Then number 3 is what I have discussed now. Creditor, why he cannot be eligible to purchase the property if it is brought for sale under the repayment plan, while action is being taken against the personal guarantor to the corporate debtor. All my questions relate to this personal guarantor to corporate debtor only.
Yes, yes.
Rajeshwari ji,
Yes, sir.
we have noted your query. If you can properly draft the query and send it to us, it will help us to send a.
I can send, sir. I will send.
Yes, please. Yes, yes.
I will send my queries. Whatever you feel relevant to be addressed to IBBI, please address, sir.
Definitely, ma'am.
Sure, sure.
Sir, may I know who's with whom I am talking, sir?
Sanjay, you've been talking. I've been myself, Sudarshan Kedia, and you've been talking to Sanjay Banka also.
Fine, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So, in case there are any other query, kindly raise it, and Mr. Kedia will address to those queries, please.
Sir, excuse me, sir. With
Yes.
the email to which I have to send, can you?
Sudarshan.kedia, the mail
same
from which,
ID from where I have got. Okay,
link.
I'll do.
You have got the link.
Yeah. Fine, sir. Thank you.
So, if someone want to raise a query, please raise your hands. We will unmute. Rajula ji.
So Sanjay ji, I suppose we can call it for a day.
I think there is one, Rajula ji has raised her hand. So,
Okay, done.
Rajula ji, you can unmute and then ask your query. Not clear. Yeah, I think we can call it a day.
Yeah, we'll conclude accordingly.
So, any closing remark? So, we thank you everybody for joining this session, and it was quite a wonderful session by Kedia ji. And we are sure and confident that you would have enjoyed and you would have got understanding as to how to primarily how to use these decisions for our day-to-day working in the insolvency and banking practices, and we make our plans and resolution plan accordingly. Rajula ji, you have again raised your hands. Sudarshan ji, can you unmute?
हाँ, एक मिनट.
नहीं हो रहा ना? I think she is now exit. I think now she is exited.
Okay, done.
Yes.
So my humble request, you all members do have my mail ID. So if you do have any queries, wherein you find us that we can add value to it and we can address it accordingly. So do mail me your queries, and I will ensure that I will get it addressed in a more appropriate way accordingly. So thank you for coming, and
Thank you, sir.
thank you.